All right. Thank you so much for being here today. We have the great honor to host the talk of Professor Welch. She's going to present on public art and embodied cognition for mental health. It's a huge pleasure for me to have such a prolific and active scholar with us today. And Shay, the floor is all yours. Thanks for being here.
Okay. Well, also, since my students are doing the work for themselves, please ask me questions. So this is your chance to see me do my research. That's not the stuff that you have to do homework on. So jump in whenever you want to. So basically what's going on is I'm doing a couple of different projects right now. So I'm doing a lot of embodied cognition and public art that follows from my work on embodiment and dance and how the body is a knower and how creative movement helps us find questions in our bodies so that we can use our bodies to actually communicate narratives with others, right? But I'm also doing a residency. I'm a scholar in residence for the City of Atlanta's Public Art Project. And so I'm thinking about the ways that I was looking at dance in the body and thinking about that, how that would apply in the public and why we would want to have that in the public. So the Beltline, which is what it's called, prides itself on its public art. But the thing about public art and art in general is that it's very elitist. And this is actually the cornerstone of my work for the Beltline, is that I'm very concerned with the elitism of art and public art and how it only speaks to a small section of our community. And so then you have, tons of people going by this public art thinking that it's not for them. So then we have to ask questions about, what do we want public art to be doing? How do we think public art can do these things? And for me, and for everybody, right? Everybody says that art is democratic and that art is for the community and that art does all of these things for well-being, generally speaking. And I'm like, well, how's that happen? Especially if art is perceived as being geared to certain people. And then also, I'm doing all this work on madness, right? And I'm doing a lot of work on affective mental health disorders and how the body stores things like trauma or just experiences that impact our ability to regulate our emotions or even feel them well. And that we need to look at the body to understand how to use it purposefully to regulate our emotions. And so then I start thinking, well, if art has all this power and public art is supposed to be able to do all this community well-being work, why wouldn't it be the case that public art can help our mental health, right? So this is kind of how I got here. And another reason why I'm thinking about public art being this way is because that for most new accounts you're a clinical practitioner, right? And so we're learning how traditional methods of mental health treatment are not particularly effective, right? So we have issues of medication, making people worse, making people sick, making people not themselves. We have talk therapy, which is really just psychiatrists following dominant norms of understanding themselves, which are usually skewed towards white male bias, especially when it comes to like women of color's bodies. Then we have like cognitive behavioral therapy. And this is supposed to be seen as being really effective, but the way that it works out is just that people are trying to convince you to use mindfulness to convince yourself to behave differently. So it's like, oh, if you just sit still for a little bit and then reflect for 10 seconds and hold your breath, and then you can take a slower action. And it's almost like you're trying to trick yourself into behaving differently, even if you don't feel differently. And my experience with cognitive behavioral therapy has always been very negative because I feel like it's not intended to connect with how I feel. And that cognitive behavioral therapy is always telling me to just feel differently. And even if it's saying, and it's like if you don't feel differently when you're doing these things, you're still expected to act differently. And so it's a little bit weird for me to see how that works. And I know that other people who suffer from madness disorders also do not feel like they benefit from these kinds of therapies. So what are people benefiting from? Art movement therapy. So there's significant research right now about how art is one of the most significant ways of treating mental health disorders, especially when they're connected to a difficulty regulating your emotions, right? And this is because creativity helps you helps you sort of imagine yourself as being otherwise in the moment. So you're in the process of building and creating, and you have to be thinking of ways to build, which is making yourself thinking of being more of an active agent, right? So you are recognizing your agency in that moment and the intention for yourself to build. And when you can start the building process, then you can also start thinking of the future. Like, where is this going to go? How am I going to get there? What am I going to do next? How am I going to make this beautiful? Or how am I going to make this painful? Right. And you have like all of this intentionality going into it. And it's a lot of your own narrative that's fueling this, the narrative of your affective, your emotional states. And so we can think about creativity as a way of allowing us to feel more agency through the process of building itself. And even that forward looking experience of building can help us start to reshape our narratives of ourself, right? Instead of being considering ourselves um, unmanageable or uncontrollable or inert or like an inability to participate or interact or all of these things, moving forward with the creative process helps us see ourselves as being an active agent and feeling active emotions and feeling like you're interacting with something and that you're going to have a positive thing on the other side. And so it's very difficult for people to start doing art movement therapy. But when you start doing it, then it has all of these like positive effects on how you start to see yourself in the future because you're learning how to build a future through creative practice. Right. And dance movement therapy is one of the most beneficial ones, especially for people who suffer from madness disorders related to emotional expression and for people who have trauma, long-term trauma that's buried in the body and also trauma that is constantly at the surface. So for dance movement therapy, it's a way of a facilitator helping you learn how to interact with your body in a way that closes the gap between your alienation from yourself, which a lot of times is what makes it so difficult for you to feel like you can get a grasp on something, right? So a lot of times we feel like we can't hold on or that we can't help people understand. And we feel a lot of disruptions in our body and a lot of discomfort and a lot of actual physical pain and illness. And we can feel all of these kinds of ways that will make us feel completely disconnected from our body or even hostile to our body because of the way that we're experiencing um, how this trauma is coming at us, right? Whether or not we are aware of it or not. And so the facilitator can actually help us find movement patterns that connect us more strongly to our emotions, that can help us learn how to confront them in gentle ways, right? So it's learning how to just kind of like come up to your emotions and how to kind of maybe even introduce yourself to your emotions and to slowly use the movement to get stronger and stronger connections to the way that your body is talking to you, to eventually get to the place where you can see how the body is storing certain kinds of trauma, and then using creative movement and facilitated movement to access that trauma and to either uncover it and directly confront it, or to help you learn how to feel it and manage it in a certain kind of way. So these are different ways in which art itself is used for mental health, right? And all of this rests on understanding that our body is the source of our knowledge, and our body is the knower, and that things that we experience all have an emotional connection to them. And the way that we understand the world, and the way that we understand ourselves, and the way that we interact with others, or fear interacting with others, are all tied to our emotions, and this is the center of our knowledge. And so this is why movement works so well, because movement is a way of getting into our bodies to access this kind of knowledge. And when our emotions are the source of our cognition, then our emotions are going to be the things that we need to touch and feel and really be in connection with in order to have an understanding of who we are. Because when we're super disconnected from our emotions, and when we're super like in a dissonant state with our body, and when we feel like our body is working against us, then what it does is it cuts us off from a certain kind of knowledge that we have about ourselves, period. Right. And so that in effect prevents us from having a narrative of ourself, or we'll have very choppy senses of narrative. And this is where it can be like pieces of negative conceptions of the self, where the body is hanging on and telling you all of the difficulties it's having. Like, I feel pain, I feel sick, I feel afraid, because these are the dominant emotions that you're having from these dominant experiences. And trying to find ways of moving to connect to all of your emotions, to bring all of your emotions to the forefront, is a way of helping you plug those spots in with other things that are going on with your life, right? And helping you build a narrative from what has, it can feel like who you are has crumbled. And when you start to bring your emotion into a regulated sense, when you start to feel like you can feel your emotions and you can identify the kinds of knowledge that you're getting from your emotions, then you can be more consistent in thinking about who you are, right? And when you have an ability to think about who you are, you also have an ability to think about who you want to be. And that's one of the ways of trying to manage madness specifically, right? Because you have to have something to hold on to. And usually the thing that you hold on to is the knowledge of your body, because that is where you pull your sense of self from. Okay. So I'm trying not to ramble on. Okay. So our bodies are telling us what we need to know in response to the world, even if our beliefs about the world are contradicting that. And that's where a lot of madness happens, right? Is that your body is giving off signals about what you should be attending to and the kinds of knowledge that you should be seeking about your experiences, but your beliefs about the world are telling you that certain kinds of things don't matter, or certain kinds of things aren't as important as you think that they are, or the things that other people are telling you about yourself and your behavior are what's actually happening, instead of being able to have enough connection to yourself that you can think about people not taking the time to listen to you, and they're making snap judgments about how you're reacting, instead of trying to participate with you in a way that makes sense to both of you, And so your body is always constantly reacting. And through creative movement or movement generally, you can start figuring out what matters to you by listening to your body. And these sorts of things are the values that you can use in your self-narrative. And this sounds very lofty, right? This is all like, oh, if you just move creatively, then you can access your heart. If you access your heart, then you can be who you want to be. And that's not where I'm going with this at all, right? It's a way of trying it, like it's a very complicated thing. Like movement therapy is a very art therapy and movement therapy are very painful kinds of therapy because it's tapping into this deep body knowledge that in other kinds of therapy aren't even attended to, because traditional therapy teaches you for the most part that your body is an enemy and that your body is betraying you and that you have to be more rational than your body so that you can correct its confusion about the world. And in trying to imagine yourself otherwise is also a very difficult, long-standing process. And so when people talk about the effectiveness of art therapy, it sounds so pretty. And it sounds like we're all wearing ribbons and moving around and like being hippies, but that's not really what it's like. It's a very difficult kind of process that takes a long time. Okay. So I'm trying not to get into the whole body memory thing because that is a very long story. But we can say that our body memories are the place where we carry these kinds of traumas. And so the way that we move will trigger certain kinds of body memories because your body stores the past. And when you're acting and you're moving, it can actually cause those experiences to surface, right? So we talk about the body memory, not pulling back the memory of the past, but reenacting the past. And this is how movement therapy, when used very carefully, it has to be a very careful thing, and you have to have a very, very good and a very empathetic facilitator to tap into these body memories in a way that lets you slowly encounter them. Because people who try to be like dance movement therapists, because it's very trendy right now, can be very dangerous to people because they don't understand the depth and the dangers of triggering body memories. And so that's why dance movement therapy can be very dangerous and it can be very painful and it's a long-standing process. So where am I going with this? Okay. Let me see. So
Hey, can I
yes,
ask a question? I
yeah.
always had this question since we just broke a moment the flow. But art therapists are normal therapists? Do they receive the training of normal therapists and then they become art therapists, or do they have their own training? I've always been wondering
As
this.
far as
Thank you.
I'm aware, there is a very specific kind of art therapy training. I don't know if they're done in tandem, but I would guess that at least there may be a way for people to just directly become art movement therapists with a therapy education now, where they can actually go in the direction of art movement therapy. But we think about people who were inventing somatic work, right? And the people who were inventing movement therapy, and those people were already trained as therapists, but these people were already also artists. And so they were taking their understanding about their benefits of art on their own mental health, and then creating methods for using this. So the basic, some of the basic ones are like the Feldenkrais method, right? And that's a very gentle movement therapy, right? And it's almost like a very soft way of learning how to reconnect to your body. Like even just basic balancing, like using a certain kind of balancing to, it's like if you can learn how to balance your body, you can learn how to like think about balancing your emotions, right? and having a balanced sense of self. And then you have this movement where it progresses into the somatic therapy. And for me, somatic therapy is both the most effective and the most dangerous. Right, because you can have dance movement therapy, and dance movement therapy can give you a place to like come to be in your body and use your body and express your body in positive ways, even if it's ugly. You know, these are usually group sessions, and it really is a place for you to learn how to embrace your body through creative movement. But the somatic therapy stuff, that's really when you need a strong facilitator, because you start tapping, like you are tapping deep into that body memory. Like you're using certain kinds of, in my somatic work, when I have worked with the dancers and worked them through somatic practices, they had a very, like, these are dancers, like they're dancers, and they were struggling with getting that deep into their body, because they started out and they were like, oh, I've lived in my body my whole life and I'm such a creative dancer and I know how to experience my emotions. And I was like, get on the ground. I was like, lay down, strap up, we're about to do a thing. And they were like, it's gonna be fine. And they were really going through it, because I was doing a lot of like imagery mapping using sense perception. So trying to teach them how to use sense perception to dominate images, and how to learn how to do things like smell the light. You know, like because like I was confusing their perception and also forcing them to be separate from image dominance. Because image dominance is one of those things that is tied to explicit beliefs. I don't know why this is explicit beliefs, but it is, apparently. And so I was trying to get to their senses, like textile. You know, I would be like, okay, feel the texture of the ground, but now think about the way the ground is touching your elbow. And like think about, so instead of thinking about what the body feels like going into the ground, think about what the body, you know, what the ground feels like coming into the body. And instead of thinking about, oh, it's pressing into my back, like what does it feel like when the carpet, the curls of the carpet are, you know, curling around your elbow, right? So like pulling them really into this thing to the point where I could start getting them to move muscle contractions through their body using their sense perception, which I know this sounds bonkers. It sounds like madness. But it is a thing that if you can get people in that state, the ability to which that we can use our bodies as a director of our sense perceptions is quite immense. And then learning how to tap into memories by staying away from the image of it. You know, it's like find a memory. What does it smell like? How bright, you know, how bright is the light on your skin? You know what I mean? Like, can you feel the closeness of the person in the memory? So instead of being like, who do you see? What's there? You know, you start pulling on these, like, what does it feel like? What does it smell like? Can you taste, you know, can you taste the salt in the air? Like, you know, but you have to do it without over prompting, because you don't want to try to force something into their memory, right? And these are really long training sessions. And there was an interesting thing where I was training dance partners and they were doing partner somatic work, and they imagined they pulled out the same memory. So when I want you to find your memory, go into your body. You know, I call it the basket. I don't know, like the basket is the seat of your body knowledge, right? It's your cognitive unconscious. And I'm instructing them. They're placed close enough together where it's almost like they can feel that energy between them, but there's no touch, right? So they can feel each other, but they're not touching each other. And we had been doing the somatic work for a really long time. I mean, we were like an hour into it. And, you know, I'm like, go into your basket, find your memory. Let's start, like, what do you smell? What do you blah, blah, blah. And when we came out of it, like I had the notes, right? Because we're working on this somatic method. And I'm like, okay, what are your memories? Like, and when one of them started talking about it, they were like, that is exactly the memory that I was using, except for your thing that they were talking about a specific time when they went scuba diving together in the Cayman Islands in a specific dive. So one of them was remembering what it was like to be on the pier before they were getting in the water, and the way like they had like mimosas or something like that before they got in the water. And the other one was thinking about when they were on near the ship of the dive and the way that they were swimming around the ship. But they had both picked their same shared experience. So the somatic work really can dip into these body memories in a way that, if you're not careful, can really hurt you, right? And so this is one of the reasons why we're getting super off topic. But when I'm talking about sorry y'all, when I'm talking about the use of AI, so that you have AI's generative dance. Well, so imagine that you have a clinical practitioner, a clinical psychologist who's like, oh man, people are really into this dance movement therapy right now. I bet I can make some extra money if I offer this as a service. And then what they do is they start using generative AI to generate choreography for the dance movement therapy. And then that could create a lot of trouble. You've got a face.
I didn't think it was possible, and it's so wrong because that's something artificial that goes pressing over emotional lived experiences of other people. Oh God, how messy.
But yeah, exactly. I mean, but think about it. Like, think about the guy who's 55 years old, who has his own practice, and he's running out of clients, and he's like, I know how to recruit more people. Let me use this new trendy dance movement therapy. He doesn't know anything about movement. What is the easiest way to do that? Use generative dance. Go into AI and say, what is the best movement therapy for accessing trauma? Right? And if you go into AI and you ask it for generative movement, it'll give you a whole movement sequence. So when I was working with my partner on generative dance and dissociation, because it's disembodied and dissociated, we would give it prompts and it would just give us straight up movement methods, like movement sequences. And I was like, man, if somebody gets their hands on this, somebody who doesn't know what they're doing, this can really hurt somebody. So, that's like one of my big concerns, or why I'm always trying to talk to people about the seriousness and the carefulness that has to go into these kinds of movement therapies.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, there's a question from Simone. Do you want to ask it yourself, Simone, or should
Yeah,
I?
Simone, ask me yourself.
So I was watching some YouTube videos the other day, and like regular therapists were talking about how they have problems having breakthroughs with people who intellectualize their feelings. So do you think there's a specific type of person who would have problems having breakthroughs with this type of therapy?
Yeah. And, think about when we did metaphysics, and think about how many people were like, the body is the knower. That's ridiculous. Do you know what I mean? When people are like, oh, or like when we're talking about in feminist ethics about the rationality of emotions and how emotions can shape what is rational for you and how you're deliberating rationally, right? We're taught historically in philosophy, period, in Western ideology, that emotions are trash and that emotions are irrational and that emotions are dangerous and emotions are what makes us crazy. And our experience of emotions are what damages our relationships and all of these kinds of things, right? So if somebody is just completely convinced that their bodies and their emotions are the villain, in the situation, they're going to refuse to be trying to find connections to their body. And the reasons why things like talk therapy and traditional therapy, and a lot of times cognitive behavioral therapy, doesn't work well for people who have like madness, like bipolar and borderline and certain forms of schizophrenia, right? All these kinds of things, is because they try to teach you how to dominate your emotions. And it's like, oh, if you can just suppress this emotion, or if you can just think of a way to get through the emotion, right? Instead of talking about how to direct your emotions and how to connect to your emotions so that your emotions can lead you to a different kind of state, then that's one of the reasons why they're not so effective. But most people are going to intellectualize their emotions, because everybody gets told that when they experience strong emotions, or emotions that don't fit the norms of interaction, right, that they're behaving irrationally. So people who are experiencing affective disorders are desperately trying to find a way to explain to themselves and to others why this is happening. And this is one of the reasons why when they talk about changing the narrative, it's basically trying to teach you how to convince you how to not feel the way that you feel. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay. So, yikes. Susie, I have gone through half an hour without talking about public art. What would you like me to do?
We can jump into that. I mean, if students want to ask questions, we can keep doing what we're doing. We can jump into the next chunk of the lecture and keep going. What do you think?
Okay. Anybody else have dire pressing questions, or do you want to talk about how this works with public art? Okay. Ooh, thank you, Nathaniel. I'm glad that you find it
I
interesting.
agree.
I try to be interesting sometimes. Okay. Public art, right? So like, how does this work? Art is supposed to be like, oh, this is how we enhance our well-being, and beauty brings us like, it brings us certain kinds of joys, certain kinds of emotional states. Even if it's ugly art, it's supposed to be a way of letting us see the world through a beauty lens, because we recognize the beauty through ugliness or through pain or other kinds of things, right? Public art is intended to provide this kind of service in the community for free, right? In a way that gives all people access to this experience of well-being. And it is considered to be a way of building community bonds, because the public art is intended to be a message to the community. And so when the community interacts with the art, it's considered to be a certain kind of dialogue, right? And that it's supposed to be a way of speaking to the beliefs of the community and for identifying certain kinds of beliefs in the community. But public art oftentimes doesn't do this. But if we want to think about how public art can really build well-being in people and in the communities, we can start thinking about art being directed to these kinds of experiences with movement, right? And a lot of times public art are sculptures or paintings, and so they are exposed to us and presented to us. So either we get it or we don't, or we see it or we don't, or those kinds of things. Whereas if we're interacting with movement, we're already picking up the engagement in it. And so there's a way in which when we see movers in public doing creative kinds of movements, we are then in a direct interaction with those people. And so those people have a way of building well-being in us, because the creativity that they are expressing gives us that same experience of creativity in ourselves, because we have something called emotional contagion. And that means that emotions are contagious. So whatever kinds of emotions are being like spread to us, we can pick them up. And we also have something called kinesthetic empathy, which means that our bodies will pick up the communications of other bodies. So if we have dancers in the public sphere, when we look at the dancers, we are then in a very deep level of meaning making with those bodies. And when they are moving in certain ways, there's a thing called mirror neurons, right? And so when people are moving in different kinds of ways, we have neurons in our head that will light up. And it is the same regions of our brain that is the same pattern of movement these people are doing. And so that's why, like I always say, like, that's why when you're watching like a karate movie and the actors are like, yeah, 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 you're sitting in your seat, like, yeah, yeah, you know what I mean? You're feeling that desire to move and having to suppress the movement, right? So if somebody starts to run in a scary movie, you get that tenseness because you're picking up through contagion what their body orientations are doing, and your body is starting to communicate that same idea. So this is why if you experience certain kinds of communicative movement out in the world that is art intended to communicate with you, then that is a way of building an individual's well-being. Now, this is a public space. When people are near each other, right? So you have an artist and you have a passerby, but you don't just have one passerby, you have many passerbys. You have a moving crowd, and crowds have their own synergy. And so if the artist has pulled in the attention of the crowd, this emotional contagion can go through the crowd. So there's a sense in which you can actually build certain kind of temporary bonds when all of the attention of a crowd is directed at the same target that is causing kinesthetic empathy and emotional contagion in all of them, so that they're feeling a lot of these emotions that are being expressed by the mover, right? So that seems very complicated. There are a bunch of steps between that, but I'm hoping that like it makes sense that, because we like when we go to the, I call it the club, like when we go out or we go dancing or we go to a thing, like it's very hard unless we're in a really dark mood at that time. It's really hard to not pick up, right? So like if your friend is like getting down and she's doing good, then you're like, I want to do it too, like we're going to do a thing, and then everybody's like hype and it spreads. But if there's a fight, right, that spreads too, and your body will start picking up the same kind of communication that the bodies who are switching gears are doing, right? Nobody is able to keep that bodied communication of the joy and the hype of the dance while you have a couple of people over here aggressively interacting with each other. That aggression and that interaction will spread through the crowd, and that's why the crowd can get aggressive with each other, right? So movement and creative movement in public spaces is already modulating sort of community bonds between each other. Like you are a crowd, but you are a group. Like if you are in a nightclub or if you're in like a small park or you're doing all these kinds of things, the crowds are feeding off of each other. And so different kinds of people have different ways of talking about this. They talk about synergy. Somebody talks about seriality, which is when people aren't purposefully engaged with each other, but they are united nonetheless into a being. So this is sort of like Sartre does this in a weird way. Yeah, he starts the seriality thing. We have this notion, I have this book over here called Crowds and Power, and it talks about the generative nature of crowds, like anonymous crowds, of building a collective wisdom if they're in the space long enough together. So this contagion of art can actually create these sort of synergistic bonds between the passersby who are engaging together. And also by enhancing the well-being of each individual that can pass through the synergistic bonds and enhance the well-being of the group of passerbys. This sounds super foo-foo. This sounds super foo-foo. How about this? This is why I'm doing the residency, and this is why I'm doing all of these experiments with dancers. So I'm hiring dancers to go perform on the Beltline in secret ways that aren't spectacle, that aren't costumed, that aren't announced, that are no cameras. And they're going to go out there and they're going to do creative movement of a piece that they have choreographed just for this specific thing, just for the specific purpose of trying to communicate with the passersby. And I've set up a number of experiments. Tony Camaro is Tony. I always say his last name wrong. Tony and I have spent a lot of time together, and Beck Todd and I talked together about different kinds of experiments that I can do. So for example, one of them that I'm going to do that's really easy is that I'll set up a video camera and I'll start like there will be 100 feet. And so I'll go through and pick different individuals in the video to see how long it takes for them to pass 100 feet. Right. And I'll be measuring the time of different demographics of people to see how much they slow down, because how much they slow down will be how much attention they're investing in the communication with the moving body. And then I will take the camera and I will find 100 feet that has no performing artists, and I will record that. And then I will record the amount of time that it takes people to pass through that 100 feet. And then being able to compare the difference between the reactions and movements of the people in the presence of the performer, and how many of the people start to synchronize with each other through movement. Because when bodies are synergizing with each other, and when they're engaging with these sort of like low level embodied practices of meaning making and like emotional contagion, their bodies start to synchronize together. So they kind of like start to move towards each other. They kind of start shifting in ways that lean in towards each other. There are all kinds of ways that bodies synchronize. And so you can look at the ways in which the people who are investing attention, how much they are synchronizing with each other. So at the same time, you can measure both how much attention they're paying, what kinds of people are paying more or less attention, and how many people are able to synergize with each other if they are like investing a lot of attention. And then you just compare that to like what a normal, how long it takes for a regular person to walk through that space. And so these are ways of measuring how the public is bonding with each other and interacting in a meaningful sense with a movement artist. And we can see how that movement is communicating and changing the mood of the crowd. And so if we have public art and we have these kinds of movement arts going on regularly in public spaces, it's almost like getting a nice form of free dance movement therapy in a certain kind of way, because you're getting all these meaningful experiences and connections to your body and other people's bodies, even if you're not having to pay for it. So even if it's not a therapeutic experience, it can be sort of soul therapy, right? It can give those moments of the release of the body that lets your body feel different kinds of ways, other than the stress and dissociation and dysregulation. Because if you can synchronize with the movers, then you have, for those moments, some regulation going on. So it's like a kiss of well-being, that if we have it in enough spaces, if it happens regularly enough, if we come to expect it as a normal feature of our community, then we have this capacity for public art to contribute to enhancing mental health in the world. And I know that, I'm sorry, that sounds like so woo-woo.
No, that's fantastic. I love it. Yeah.
It's a lot to think about, and it's a lot, because that's the thing, is like you can talk about it all day long. And this is why I developed the dance movement method in my other book for the somatic work, right? It's like you can talk about it all day long, this embodied cognition and this participatory sense making and this meaning making between bodies that spreads, but it means nothing if you can't show that it's actually going to work. And for me, the performance art is the easiest method to use because it's so easy to use purposefully. And it's such a way. I always talk about oppression existing not at the level of explicit beliefs and not at the level of implicit beliefs, but in the body's bias against other bodies. Right. So you can have all kinds of beliefs about the equality of people, but your body, if your body has biases against other people, your body is still going to react to another body in that way. And so for me, one way to command the attention of another person for the purpose of justice, for trying to change like sexist or racist or other kinds of biases, is to use a moving body that can challenge the set of embodied beliefs by a passerby by showing them different ways that this body can be, right? Showing them different meanings of this kind of body, and that moving bodies are a way of communicating in a way that just anonymous moving bodies can't, because it's saying, look at me, listen to me. Because when a body is moving, it's not like a painting. You can walk right past a painting, but when a body is moving in your face, you are going to look at it. So a moving body is the one thing in the world that will command your attention, whether or not you want to give it your attention. You are always going to turn to look at the body because our bodies do the things. I'm sorry. This is
No, don't be sorry. This is fantastic. We have a question on this, and I want to give Alexis or Alexis, who knows, time to ask this question.
I mean, I'm done. I'm just going on and babbling at this point. Like,
It's
really, y'all need it.
anyway, thank you so much, Shay. Just to give you the feedback, I mean, to give you back how much you gave to us. It's just fantastic, and I hope more people will go in this direction because it's alive. I'd say, yeah. Alexis, do you want to ask your question, or do you want me to?
Sure, I can ask it. Amazing job, Dr. Welch. You did a great job. And I think your study, your experiments, and even just your knowledge and philosophy on all of this is very insightful. So you mentioned the risk of damage when it comes to the individual doing body movement and body therapy. I was curious, considering the power of body therapy, what might be the risk of damage to the viewer in your study, to the person viewing and witnessing body movement?
Yes. And so in my possible objection section, I say there's the potential for triggering because movement, right? I saw you coming, Alexis. There is a serious potential for triggering, and movement is extremely provocative, right? It can cause a heat of passion, right? And so this is what I mean about the art needs to be used very purposeful, because I've seen, how about this? I've sent the call for performers out to a number of people, and I'm looking for like non-traditional performers. Like I send it out to the circus people, I send it out to the mimes, I send it out to the live painters, the break dancers, the burlesque girls, all these kinds of things. And one of the burlesque girls was like, I would really like to do my piece on, periods. And I was like, first off, that is not, yes, viewer discretion is advised. That is not what we're doing. We're not going out there to perform your act, right? This has to be created for the community as a way to communicate with the community. I was like, but the kinds of things that you're talking about, if you're using your body in a very specific kind of way to like touch on these really like raw, oppressive narratives, the content, and your body is moving in this really resistant way, you can trigger people, right? And that's dangerous. And so people need to be very attentive, even just generally, about the kind of public art they're putting out, because there's a lot of times that things slip through the cracks that can trigger people. And if anything's going to trigger somebody, it'll be a certain kind of performance art. And when you have certain kinds of people just being like, I want to do an act, and like I did this sort of saucy thing, because like I shut it down. I was like, absolutely not. You're not doing anything like that. Like, this is supposed to be a way of bonding with the community, and this sort of like angry, aggressive, like stop hating on my period blood sort of thing that's not cool.
Thank you. We have space for one more question, if you want. I mean, we are out of time already, but
We are out of time.
okay, just one more question.
Anybody?
Eric.
Yeah, Eric, thanks a lot for coming. Where are you? Do you like works that are not body and movement based? What is the utility power to reorient the body mind? Okay. So, Eric, you are in fact the significantly better expert at art than I am. So these are he's one of my friends from when I was at Williams College, and they were museum hoppers. There you go. Thank you, Eric. Nice to see you.
Good to see you too.
You are, hi, I know. Nice to see your face. You are the art person, and you're somebody that I would be going to. Like, you and Danielle would be people that I'm like, help me understand two-dimensional art. Right? Because for me, it's very hard as a performer, it's very hard for me to try. I've never connected, you know this. I never went to the museum with y'all. I was like, this is terrible. You know, I've never connected to two-dimensional, you know, and I don't think I even know how to, but if you give me any kind of movement, I'm hooked. So I think I would send the question back to you. What do you think this kind of art can do for us? How can you help me think? Because we have performance art residents, we have sculptors in residence, we have painters and murals in residence. We've got all kinds. And I'm like, well, I can talk to the performing artists in residence, but I can't talk to the other ones. So what do you think that I can do to think about this?
It's just such an important question, because we're talking about both lives and the public arena, kind of entwined, in a certain way. And I am very interested in the connection of all the topics that you've listed: health, public art, embodiment, all of that. And I have friends who are somatic therapists, and so all of these ideas haven't necessarily been connected in the way that you're connecting them. And this is why I've decided to creep on your
creep on your
talk
today. To see you. I was like, I feel so special.
Yeah. But not being a movement artist myself, but entirely affected by non-body based artwork. I think maybe the best case that I can think of right now is the Anish Kapoor Bean in Chicago. If you guys aren't familiar with it, it's a really beautiful, like, blob, kind of cloud shaped big stainless steel thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's polished to a mirror finish, so you approach it and you're seeing your surroundings flipped over, and you see yourself reflected in its surface as you approach it. And the inside is really as you go kind of underneath it, there's a dome that sort of reverses in form that you can stand under, and it's a complete sensual experience. And here here's where I think the connection between the almost like static works almost, and this this orientation to body for the sake of focus on mental health. I know I'm screwing this up, but
No,
you
excellent.
yeah, you didn't send me any notes, so I'm shooting from the hip here. But it's the focus on what's appealing to the senses, by through the sensual experience. And that's that's a little different than movement. I think. I don't know. Like, I don't know if you'd agree with that. Certainly senses. What is that sense that you understand your body in space?
Proprioception.
Yeah, that's it. So, clearly that's engaged in movement, but about what about things like sight or hearing or touch? Did those senses offer a route to this kind of reorientation for the sake of improvement of mental health?
I mean, certainly, I think this might be me being so ignorant of art. You know what I mean? But I feel like for traditional static art, you almost have to practice orienting yourself towards it in a way
Absolutely.
of having the right kind of sensual experience of it. The piece in Chicago that you're talking about, I was thinking, I was like, oh, this is such a perfect piece because it's giving you your body and it's giving other people their bodies and it's giving the movement
Exactly.
of the bodies and it's giving the movement of even in the static environment, as you're moving around the reflective surface, it's causing your environment to move around you. So you're having this experience of all this creative movement by its reflective surface. So it's almost as if the piece itself is a performing artist.
Right. And
Yeah.
there are a couple of other really important things about that piece. Number one is that there's sort of a literacy that I think a lot of people feel like they have to look at art in museums. I always like talk about it as like a literacy. Like, I look at a painting and I know what I'm looking at, or I know what information that I should be gleaning off of that. The Anish Kapoor piece, I think, can be appreciated without that background, or without that basis of, okay, well, like, what am I because it's overpoweringly cool in the way that it sort of short circuits your self-consciousness about looking at art.
I
If
kind of
that
like that phrase.
if
Susie, you
that
might like
like
this phrase too, short-circuiting your self-consciousness.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, and it's also in the public sphere, right? It's also outside. So it's not like, like, clearing out your day, going to a museum, having to pay the $20 fee, and then, staring at a painting that you're like, okay, what am I supposed to be feeling? I don't think there's any of that with that piece.
Right.
I'm really sorry I have to interrupt this because it's flowing beautifully, but I'm up with my time.
Yeah.
Thank you, Eric, for joining and enriching from the art point of
You're
view
welcome.
this talk we're having together. And thank you, Shay. I mean, this was fantastic. I mean, I feel that we barely touched the all the vastity that it could actually be. Yeah.
It's a lot. Okay, well, holler at my students for showing up. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so
Holla for
much,
all
Angela.
the students who are on spring break who are going to have to be forced to watch the YouTube video at home.
Well,
Love you,
Eric,
Shay.
thank you so much.
Eric, I'm actually probably going to email you and we can talk about this some more. Okay.
Bye,
All
everyone.
right, Susie,
Thanks.
it was a pleasure.
Mine too.
Okay, bye y'all.
Thank you.